They say hunger makes men forget their gods, but in the village of Grey Hollow, hunger made them find new ones. For 3 years, the rains did not fall. The earth cracked, rivers withered, and children's bellies swelled with hunger while their cries echoed through empty huts. The elders whispered of an old valley, a place forbidden, a wound in the land where no bird sang, no beast wandered, and no man dared tread. They warned the people to stay away, but warnings cannot feed starving mouths. So one day, driven by desperation, the villagers gathered crude tools and descended into Black Valley. The air was heavy there, thick as ash, and the sun itself seemed to dim when they entered. They began to dig, hoping to find hidden water or roots to eat. At first, they unearthed nothing but stone and dust. Then a child screamed. From beneath the earth, pale stone emerged, a hand, massive and cold, its fingers stretched upward as if clawing to escape the soil. Fear rippled through the crowd, but hunger held them in place. They dug further and uncovered more. An enormous body of stone, faceless, eyeless, with only a gaping hollow mouth, frozen in a silent scream. The elders fell to their knees, trembling. They remembered the old stories of gods buried when the world was young, gods who had no names, only hunger. But the younger men laughed. Stone cannot eat. Stone cannot harm. If these are gods, then they are dead gods. Yet the air grew colder, and the valley grew quiet. So quiet the villagers could hear their own hearts pounding. And then, from the hollow mouth of the idol, came a sound, not words, but whispers. Dry, broken, endless whispers. They came like a draft of wind, slithering into ears, into minds, into dreams. That night, the villagers returned home, but none slept. Each dreamed of the same thing. Endless fields of red soil with statues stood in thousands, their mouths open, calling. And in the dream, they were not stone. They were waiting. The next morning, the whispers did not stop. They lingered in the villagers' heads, murmuring promises of rain, of food, of salvation. All the idols wanted was devotion. Some resisted, others listened. By the third night, the first sacrifice was made. A goat was led into the valley. Its blood poured into the hollow mouth of the idol. The whispers grew louder, clearer. The air tasted sweet with rain. Clouds gathered. For the first time in years, water touched the earth. The villagers rejoiced. But the elders wept. They knew the idols had tasted blood. And once gods begin to eat, they never stop. Soon the goats were not enough. The rain came only when the blood flowed, and the whispers grew hungrier. Chickens, dogs, then cattle. But the idols were not satisfied. Their mouths demanded more. The first child was taken on a moonless night. The villagers carried him into the valley, their eyes glazed, their steps mechanical, their prayers twisted. He did not scream as the blade touched his throat. The valley swallowed his cry, and the idol's hollow mouth drank deep. The rain returned stronger than ever. Fields turned green. Stomachs filled. The people smiled again. But in their eyes, shadows lingered. For the idols were awake now. Each night, their whispers spread through the huts like smoke. Mothers awoke to find their babies staring at walls, whispering back to voices no one else could hear. Old men clawed at their own faces, trying to tear out eyes that did not belong to them anymore. And when the villagers slept, they dreamed not of fields or rivers, but of endless stone mouths opening wider and wider, until there was nothing left in the world but hunger. The elders tried to stop it. They begged the people to abandon the idols, to flee the valley, to burn the statues back into silence. But those who resisted vanished. Some were found later at the edge of the valley, their throats cut, their blood still steaming as it seeped into the soil. Others were never found at all. And the valley grew. The earth around it cracked, spreading like veins, as though the idols beneath were stirring, moving, pushing upward. By the seventh sacrifice, no one questioned anymore. They were no longer villagers. They were worshippers, devotees of hollow gods that were never meant to be woken. And yet, the whispers were still not satisfied, because gods that feed do not stop with animals. They do not stop with children. They do not stop with strangers. The hollow gods always come for the faithful. The valley no longer slept. Every night, a sound carried on the wind, not the wind itself, but something inside it. 1,000 voices, layered and broken, like stone grinding against stone, whispering promises into the ears of the living. At first, they whispered of rain, then of harvests, then of riches and power. But beneath those promises, something darker stirred. The villagers began to dream of strange places, cities made of bone, oceans of black water, skies that bled. And in every dream, the idols stood waiting, their mouths wider than the horizon. Children woke screaming, clawing at their ears, crying that the stones were singing too loudly. The mothers silenced them, whispering prayers into the night. Prayers not to God nor spirit, but to the idols, to the hollow gods. The priest of Gray Hollow, once a man of faith, now stood every night before the largest idol. He cut open his own arms, feeding his blood into its mouth. His sermons changed, no longer about salvation, no longer about hope. He spoke only of hunger. The idols must be fed, he said, and if they are fed, they will protect us. But protection soon turned to fear. Animals began to vanish from the fields. Not stolen, not hunted. Vanish, their footprints stopping at the edge of the valley, their bodies gone. Travelers passing through the land went missing. Their wagons were found overturned on the road, their horses torn apart, their blood smeared in long streaks toward the valley. And then came the voices. One by one, villagers heard their names being called at night. They swore the whispers came not from their dreams, but from the mouths of the idols themselves. The first man who followed that call was found at dawn, kneeling before the stone with his chest ripped open, his heart missing, his face frozen in an expression of bliss. The priest declared a sign of devotion, but those who saw his corpse knew terror, not joy. Still, the hunger spread. The idols began to change. Their mouths widened, their hollow eyes deepened, their stone faces stretched as if something inside was trying to break free. At night, their surface crawled like flesh, though by morning they were still stone. The villagers could not escape. Those who tried found the roads twisted, the paths unfamiliar. A farmer swore he walked north toward the next town. Yet hours later he returned to Gray Hollow, stumbling to the fields, muttering about walls of stone that moved when he blinked. The valley had become a prison. The idols had become gods. And then came the Feast of Silence. The whispers ordered it. A night of offerings, a night of devotion. Every villager was to bring blood to the idols, not of animals, not of strangers, but of their own. Mothers cut their arms. Fathers sliced their chests. Children bled into bowls carried by the priest. The blood was poured into the hollow mouths until the earth itself was slick with crimson. And as the last drop fell, the valley roared. The whispers grew deafening, a chorus of countless voices speaking in unison. More. The ground split open, black smoke spilling into the night sky. The idols trembled, their stone faces shifting, smiling with mouths that should not have moved. And the villagers, broken, terrified, yet bound by their oath, knelt and whispered back, "We are yours." The night of the feast began without moon or star. The sky above Gray Hollow was a black curtain, heavy and endless, as if the heavens themselves had turned their gaze away. The villagers gathered in the valley, hundreds of them, standing in a circle around the idols. No one spoke. No child cried. No dog barked. The world itself was silent. Only the idols murmured, their stone mouths humming with a low vibration that made the ground tremble beneath bare feet. The priest stood at the center, his skin pale, his robes drenched in dry blood from countless offerings. His eyes were black now, hollow sockets filled with shadow. He raised his arms, and the villagers fell to their knees as one, not by choice, but by compulsion. The idols had begun to command not just their hunger, but their will. A great stone altar was pulled forward, dragged from beneath the earth by hands that bled with the effort. It was old, older than the village, carved with symbols no living man could read. Symbols that seemed to shift if stared too long. The priest placed his hands upon it, and the whispers surged. The idols wanted sacrifice, not of blood alone, but of silence. The first offering was a man, bound, gagged, his eyes wide with terror. His family had betrayed him, delivering him to the priest at dawn. He was laid upon the altar, his body trembling as the stone hummed beneath him. The priest raised a blade carved from the very rock of the idols. It was jagged, uneven, but sharp enough to split skin like paper. The blade came down, and the man's scream ripped the night apart. But it was short-lived, for as his cry echoed, the idol behind him opened its mouth wider, wider than stone should move. A great, sucking sound filled the air, and the man's scream was pulled from his lungs, not his body, not his blood, but his voice. His scream vanished into the hollow mouth, leaving his corpse writhing soundlessly, his lips moving in silence. The people gasped, but no sound came. The idols had stolen their voices. One by one, the sacrifices continued, each offering stripped not just life, but sound itself. The valley became a place of writhing bodies, wide eyes, open mouths, but no screams. Silence was a feast, and the gods devoured it greedily. And then the children were brought forth. Their parents held them down, their faces twisted with devotion, not horror. Some children cried, but their cries made no sound. Others thrashed, but their limbs grew heavy, as though invisible hands pressed them into the stone. Each child was offered, each voice swallowed into the hollow mouths of the idols. By the end, the valley was utterly still. Not a whisper, not a cry, not a word. The hollow gods had eaten every sound. But the silence did not end at the valley. When the villagers returned to Grey Hollow, their huts were silent. Fires burned but crackled without noise. The wind stirred the grass, but it made no rustle. Babies cried in silence. Mothers wept in silence. The world had been muted. The gods had not just taken blood. They had taken the very voice of the village. And in the silence, the whispers grew louder, no longer faint, no longer hidden. They filled the people's heads like a swarm of locusts, demanding more. The hollow gods had feasted, and now they hungered for the world. The valley had stolen everything, their animals, their children, their voices. Grey Hollow lived in silence now, each day a pantomime of terror. People gestured instead of speaking, their mouths opening only to breathe, their eyes always darting toward the black valley where the idol stood, whispering still. But silence could not strangle thought. In hidden corners, in barns and abandoned huts, whispers of rebellion began to grow, not spoken, but carved into wood, scratched into dirt, written in trembling hands. The people had begun to fear that the idols were not gods at all, but monsters, parasites that fed not on worship, but on the life and voice of their hosts. A blacksmith named Orin, a man who had lost his 3 children to the Feast of Silence, was the first to take action. By firelight, he gathered a small band of the desperate. Their plan was simple, almost childish: destroy the idols, break them, shatter the stone, and end the curse. They carried hammers, axes, firebrands, anything that could break stone. One night, under a sky that burned with strange red clouds, they descended into the valley. The idols loomed in the darkness, taller than any man, their hollow mouths frozen in eternal hunger. Orin struck first, swinging his hammer into the nearest idol's chest. The blow rang out like thunder. The stone cracked. Hope surged in the rebels. But then the crack bled. Thick, black ichor oozed from the wound, steaming as it touched the ground. The idol groaned, not with stone but with flesh. The rebels froze, their courage shattering as they watched the crack spread. From within the wound, something shifted, moving beneath the surface like muscle beneath skin. They struck again. And again, pieces of the idol shattered, falling to the ground. But each fragment moved. The shards crawled like insects, twitching and dragging themselves back toward the idol's body. Fingers of stone clawed at the soil, pulling themselves back into place. Within moments, the broken pieces rejoined, the wound sealing itself, the idol whole again, stronger, taller. The rebels screamed, but no sound came. The silence still clung to them like a curse. Their terror had no voice. One of them, a woman named Elira, tried fire. She poured oil onto the idol and lit a flame. The statue burned, cracks glowing red with heat. For a moment, it looked as though it might collapse, but instead, the fire bled into stone. The flames sank inward, vanishing into the idol's hollow mouth. Its eyes glowed red, and it opened its jaw wider. The god had eaten the fire, and now it hungered for more. The rebels turned to flee, but the valley shifted. The ground cracked, splitting open into a maze of black fissures. From within them, hands emerged, not flesh, not stone, but something between. Hollow hands, with fingers too long, grasping, pulling at legs and arms. Orin swung his hammer wildly, smashing the hands to dust, but for each he broke, 3 more clawed their way out. Elira was the first to fall. She screamed silently as the hands dragged her beneath the earth, her body vanishing into the black fissures. One by one, the rebels were taken. Orin alone remained bloodied and broken, his hammer slick with ichor. He staggered toward the edge of the valley, his chest heaving with breathless sobs. For a moment, he thought he had escaped, but as he stumbled into the fields, he felt it, a weight in his chest, a shadow in his lungs. His breath faltered, his vision dimmed. He fell to the earth, clawing at his throat. The idols had followed him home. In the morning, the villagers found his body sprawled in the grass, his chest caved in, his face locked in a voiceless scream, and on his skin, carved into the flesh as if by invisible knives, were words no one had written. There is no rebellion, only hunger. The people despaired. If stone could not be broken, if fire could not burn, if even courage could be devoured, then what hope was left? And yet, in the silence, in the fear, something else stirred. Because faith may shatter, but despair can breed fury. And fury can be far more dangerous than faith. It began with footsteps, not the footsteps of men, nor beasts, but something heavier. A sound that made the earth tremble, that made water ripple in jars, that woke every sleeper in Gray Hollow. At first, no one dared look outside. They only listened. A rhythm, slow, unstoppable, like a heartbeat but in stone. When dawn came, the truth was revealed. The idols were no longer confined to the valley. They walked from the eastern road. One was seen striding past the fields, its hollow face turned toward the rising sun. Its body was stone, but it moved with the unnatural fluidity of flesh. Farmers hid beneath their beds as its shadow passed over their homes. Livestock lay silent, throats slit open by no hand. From the riverbank, another was spotted, kneeling in the waters. It did not drink. It did not wash. Instead, it submerged its hollow mouth and breathed. The river ran black for a mile downstream, fish floating belly up in its wake. The hollow gods had been bound to their valley by faith. Now, faith had broken. Their prison was undone, and hunger drove them forward. Wherever the idols walked, silence followed. Entire villages were found without sound, not a single voice, not a single bird, not even the buzzing of flies over corpses. Doors stood open, food left half-eaten, lives cut short in an instant of voiceless terror. Witnesses, few and broken, told of how the idols stood among the people waiting, not striking, not killing, waiting. And then, one by one, the villagers dropped, clutching their throats, their screams stolen before they could escape. Children fell first, then the elders, then everyone else. The idols fed not on flesh, but on voice, on life itself. What was left behind were husks, bodies shriveled as though drained of air, their faces frozen in eternal silent cries. They called it the plague of silence. In Gray Hollow, a few clung desperately to worship. They built new shrines, they sang hymns, they cut their own tongues and spilled blood before makeshift altars. They believed obedience would save them. One night, as the idols approached the village square, the faithful gathered, chanting wordlessly with open mouths, offering themselves in worship. They believed they would be spared. But the idols did not spare. They listened, they waited, then they devoured. The faithful were drained where they stood, collapsing in piles of bloodless skin. The idols consumed not their offerings, but their voices, their last prayers stolen into the void. Worship was no shield. There was no God to appease. Only hunger. By the time the moon turned red, the hollow gods had left their valley forever. They wandered the world, aimless yet unstoppable, drawn only by life. Cities barred their gates, sounding horns of warning. Armies formed lines with spears and fire. But against stone that bled, against mouths that devoured flame, against silence itself, no defense held. Battles became graveyards. Voices became whispers. Songs became memories. And soon, whole kingdoms fell into silence. Yet somewhere, in the ashes of despair, a rumor spread, not of hope, but of truth. For in the ancient ruins beyond the northern mountains, carved into walls older than kingdoms, there were markings, not prayers, not warnings, but instructions. Instructions on how the hollow gods were made, and perhaps how they could be unmade. The valley was not the beginning. Long before Gray Hollow, before the first hymns, before the first idol was raised in stone, there was another people, ancient, forgotten, erased. Their ruins lay in the far north, buried beneath glaciers and storms. Only whispers remained that they had created gods, and for their arrogance had been consumed. It was said their language was older than the wind, their rites older than death. They carved life into stone, not to worship it, but to bind it. They believed flesh was weak, mortal, fleeting. Stone endured, and so they sought immortality. They tore their souls from their bodies, not all at once, but in fragments, each fragment sealed within a statue, each hollow mouth an empty vessel, waiting to be filled. The people believed this would grant them eternal life. They would become gods of silence, gods of eternity. But when the last soul was placed into stone, there were no people left, only idols. And idols do not love their makers. Deep in the frozen north, explorers returned with tablets of black stone, engraved with strange sigils. On them, the truth was written. We made gods escape death, but in stone death waits still. They feed not on blood, not on flesh, but on the breath of the living. Their mouths are hollows, their hunger endless. To unmake them, blood must return to stone. One life for every idol, one soul for every hollow. It was no prophecy. It was a warning. The hollow gods would be undone, but only if blood was spilled willingly, offered freely in sacrifice. One living soul to bind and shatter each idol. To end them all, an entire people would have to be given. A small band of survivors set out from Gray Hollow, carrying the black tablets. They traveled north through silent forests, past villages where no song was heard, through mountains echoing only with their own hollow breath. At last, they reached the ruins, a vast temple carved into ice, where the first people had become gods. Inside, the walls were covered with carvings of the ritual, men cutting their chests open, women pressing their mouths against stone hollows, their souls pouring inside, children holding daggers, waiting to be drained. And there, in the final chamber, a pool of frozen blood stretched across the floor, still glistening red despite the centuries. The survivors read the last words carved into the wall. To kill a god, you must become its food. To silence the hollow, you must give your voice. To end what we began, you must end yourself. And so the truth became clear. The hollow gods could die, but the price was not one life, not 2, not 10. It was all, every survivor, every soul willing to spill blood freely. Only then could the statues crumble, their hunger starved, their mouths silenced forever. But who would give themselves? And who would cling to the last scraps of life? As the idols spread across the world, the survivors carried this knowledge back with them. Some believed the sacrifice must be made. Others whispered that perhaps it was better to live in silence than not to live at all. And the hollow gods walked on, feeding, waiting, hungering. The world had grown quiet, not by choice, by hunger. The hollow gods walked across the lands and seas, their stone feet grinding soil into dust, their vast shadows swallowing villages whole. Wherever they passed, life fell still. No screams, no prayers, no songs, just silence, always silence. And yet a remnant remained, a last, fragile band of survivors carrying the black tablets, carrying the truth of what had to be done. They wandered the broken earth, their steps guided by despair, until they reached the ruins of Gray Hollow one final time. Above them stretched the sky, emptied of stars, emptied of birds, emptied even of the whisper of wind. The heavens themselves had fallen mute. There, at the altar of the first hollow idol, the place where it all began, they gathered. Their faces were pale, hollow-eyed, their breath ragged. One voice broke the silence. We cannot live like this. Better to end ourselves and leave the world to silence. But another clung desperately to life. Why must all of us die? Can one sacrifice not be enough? Why should every soul be taken? The black tablets glowed with their cruel truth. One soul for every idol, one voice for every hollow. Only when all are given will the hunger cease. The idols encircled the ruins like a circle of predators, mouths gaping, waiting. Their hunger was patient, endless. The survivors drew rusted daggers, their edges blackened by centuries of use. One by one, they cut their palms, their arms, their throats, and their blood-filled bowls carved from bone. They pressed their lips to the hollow mouths of the idols, and with each trembling kiss their breath left them. Their bodies fell like broken dolls, their voices stolen forever. The idols drank greedily, and for the first time since their rising they trembled. Cracks spread across their stone. Their mouths opened in a shriek without sound, a scream so deep it tore the air though no ear could hear it. But not all were willing. One survivor broke from the circle, dagger clutched to his chest, fleeing into the shadows. His fear outweighed his faith, his terror stronger than his devotion. He would live, even if it meant being the last man on earth. But the idols turned toward him, their mouths gaped wider. A silence deeper than death poured forth, and in that silence his scream was ripped away. He fell to the earth, hollowed, his body collapsing like an empty shell. The unwilling were not spared. None would escape. At the altar, only one remained, a young woman, blood staining her dress, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the world. She looked upon the cracked idols, their stone skins breaking, their titanic frames trembling with collapse. She raised her head to the endless mute sky and spoke the final words humanity would ever hear. "We end with silence," she whispered, "but not with surrender." She pressed her lips to the last idol, gave her final breath, and in an instant the god shattered, collapsing into dust. When dawn rose over broken earth, the world was empty. No voices, no songs, no prayers, only ruins, only echoes, only silence. Yet in that silence there was peace. The hollow gods were gone. Their hunger ended, but the cost was everything. And so the world ended, not in fire nor in flood, but in silence.